when school isn't a place you have to be, why not?
All right, so it's 4 p.m. and let's get started. I'm just gonna sound check. Everyone can hear me. You can nod. So, yep. All right, cool. So, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Bee Friendly Fall 2019 webinar. And the background music was the Flight of the Bumblebee by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov from the 1899 to 1900 as part of his orchestral interlude. And it's quite famous, but it's evokes the seamless, chaotic, and rapidly changing flying pattern of a bumblebee. And it's well known today, even if you don't know it by name, it's very much recognizable. So just a few protocols. I know a student was asking already. We're going to have time for question and answer at when our 5 panel presenters are going to finish with their presentation. So it's a good 15 or 20 minutes at the end. You are most welcome to put questions in the chat box at any time. And I will monitor that as well, but we'll hold off. And at the end, you are welcome to unmute and ask a question. You don't have to just use the chat box. And you can also raise a hand and do it that way too. So whatever, we're going to be pretty flexible as far as going. I know I hit the record button, so I'm just going to double check on my end here. Yes, it does say that. So let me go to my first slide. Let me introduce our panel. So our webinar today is in support of Washtenaw Community College's Bee Campus USA designation that was in November of 2019. And as part of our designation, we will host a few programs each year to educate our community that includes students, faculty, staff, community members about the importance of bees. So let me introduce our panel here, and then I will monitor our presentation here today. So I have Dr. Emily Thompson, both in biology and the environmental sciences department. Dave Wooten from the biology department. I did see Dave's on the list, so I know he's here. Dr. Kimberly Hill Edwards from environmental sciences department. Monica Mila, who is an instructor with the WCC community enrichment program. And Holly Herman, who's the manager of landscape and grounds on campus. So I'm going to get started here, and we're going to begin with Dr. Thompson, who will begin our program. So Dr. Thompson, what is the importance of planting native plants for native pollinators, and how can we build a native bee house to help our pollinators thrive? And I'm going to stop sharing so that you can, there we go.
All right, thank you very much, Sandy McCarthy, and people can call me Emily, please. I have a presentation to share with you. My interest in bees, I've been on the committee for a couple of years, and my interest in bees, began even stronger during the pandemic when I was looking for activities that would take me outside. And so actually in February and March, I started planning a bee-friendly garden, and with my family planted that and also made a bee house. I was planning for more bee houses, but it gets complicated during the pandemic, doesn't it? So I wanted to ask everyone how many of you have done or have bee-friendly houses or gardens in your houses, in your, where you live, your apartments, your houses, or on your campus. And I'm looking in the chat, and I am seeing that the panel certainly has, and that some of our our attendees also have done so. And I just want to point out, I have pictures here of bees that are not the honeybees, and we're going to be talking about a number of these different kinds of bees. So what's a bee? And David Wooten will follow. I hope I'm not taking too much of his thunder there. A bee is an insect. It has 3 body parts with a constricted waist Those 3 body parts are head, thorax, and abdomen. It has 2 pairs of wings, and many of the females carry pollen, sometimes on a hairy hind leg, sometimes in a little sac, pollen sac. Why are bees important? Pollinators pollinate 30% of our crops. So we also have, for example, wind pollination that makes the bread shown in this slide of what I picked up at the farmer's market recently. And bees pollinate 90% of non-crop plants as well. So that would be our native plants that we enjoy looking at. I just think it's fun to see what you can get at the farmer's market. What are the bees beside the honeybees? Well, pictured on the left are honeybees. And we have social bees and we also have solitary bees. The social bees are the ones you're thinking about, the honeybees that live in a hive. Those are native to Europe and we imported them because we love to get honey. But they include, social bees include also bumblebees and stingless bees, and they live together socially. In the United States, about 90% of our bees are solitary bees. And my kids love to see the solitary bees out on the playground, little sweat bees and minor bees poking their heads out of the soil. How many types of bees are there? Xerces tells us, which is a pollinator society, tells us there are about 20,000 in the world, about 4,000 in the US, and about 450 in Michigan. Here's our county, and our county has, it looks like 150 species according to the color located there. And they are in these families of classification. And instead of reading the bold names, I'll read you the common names, which aren't so common. We have mining bees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, honeybees, polyester bees, so-called because they make brood chambers with secretions that are waterproof, sweat bees that are attracted to sweat, oil collecting bees that put oil in their brood chambers, and leaf cutter and mason bees. And their names indicate some of their behaviors. Which bees are on the endangered species list? Well, actually, there are a lot of bees that are threatened with extinction. And remember, they pollinate our food. So this is a problem for us. There are 6 yellow-faced bees on the list in Hawaii and 1 on the list in Michigan. And it's pictured here. This is the rusty patch bumblebee, Bombus affinis. Why are bees threatened with extinction? Because of human development and loss of their habitat. Their flowers, some of them are ground living. They need exposed ground surface that isn't mowed. Also use of pesticides and colony collapse disorders, among others. What would Earth look like without bees? And this is how someone at House Beautiful imagined life would be without bees, pollinating native species and crop plants. What can we do to help? Well, that's why we're here. That's why we're having this seminar. And the things that I'm going to be talking about very briefly are building bee houses. And I'm just going to mention my species that I'm growing in my new garden with native flowering plants. Bees also need a source of water. We need to stop using pesticides that kill bees, and we need to help get bees listed as endangered species. 70% of North America's native bee species nest in the ground. Here's the digger bee and the digger bee burrow. And you know what this looks like. This is like the playground, right? Where the grass isn't so great, but it's great habitat for some of these bees. So what can we do to help protect them? We can protect patchy areas from mowing, grazing, from fumigants, landscaping mulch, and off-road vehicle use. 30% of North American native bee species nest in tunnels. So they nest in snags or dead trees that are standing upright. They nest in plant stems that are left after the plants die. They nest in old rodent nests in grass clumps. And this is showing one such clump. So how can we help with these? We can protect snags and dead trees and leave them upright as long as possible. We can avoid excess mowing. Those are some things. All right, Now on to the meat of the talk here, building bee houses. And I know others in the group have done even more than I have. So I'll just introduce this topic. These are bee boxes built to the specifications of the Xerces Society. And it's recommended that you follow these instructions so that the bees are going to live well in them and not die for some unknown reason here. A nesting block is shown here where untreated wood has had holes dug in it or drilled into it at specified diameters and specified lengths. Shown here is a bundle of tubes to mimic those stems. And the third is a bumblebee box, which I didn't get to build. It's still on my list. I just ran out of time this summer. And so once again, you're using preservative-free lumber for blocks. Bees like to have one end closed. You follow specifications for the whole width and whole length. When you put up the houses, they should face east or southeast to get morning sunlight and should be protected from rain. And bees need to have flowers and water available to them. So that was getting my supplies together. I used some straws and I cut the fatter straws longer, 5 to 6 inches, and I cut the narrower diameter straws shorter, 3 to 5 inches, according to Xerces instructions. It worked well with scissors. And then here are the bamboo, which we used a saw to cut, and we made those all so that we could put the straws inside them. Here are the two kinds of houses we built. And so you can see the straws of different diameters within the bamboo. And then we just have a bucket that we've put the straws in as well. And there it is in our backyard with the source of water facing the correct direction. And I just wanted to include a list of the native bee plants I put in my garden: black-eyed Susan, bee balm, foxglove beard's tongue, hairy beard's tongue, blue false indigo, Culver's root, sweet Joe pie, golden Alexander's, and New England aster, which my bumblebees love, 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 love. We have a lot of the yard in aster. That is it for my contributions. Thank you very much for listening. And next up, I believe, is going to be David.
Well, thank you, Emily. So yes, next up we're going to have, and I see a question in the chat box, and we'll get to that towards the end. So Dave was on campus 2 weeks back, and he's sharing with us the basic bee biology and ecology, as well as native species and why bees are important to our agriculture. And we have a pre-recorded presentation here at our hoop house on campus. So give me a quick second here to share that, everyone. Hold on.
Hi everybody, my name is David Wooten. I'm from the biology department here at Washtenaw Community College. You know, Michigan has over 450 different species of bees in the state.
Andy, we can't see the video.
20,000 different types of bees and wasps.
All right, so it looks like it was not sharing, is that correct?
Yeah, we see your screen, but not the video screen.
All right, hold on, because I did test this out and I can get it right. So hang on 1 second. Let's get this. Oh, here we go. Hold on. This might work for us. Actually, this one will. Hold on. Can we see it now?
There you go.
Perfect. I did test this out. All right, cool. Let's keep going. Let me restart.
Hi everybody, my name is David Wooten. I'm from the biology department here at Washtenaw Community College. You know, Michigan has over 450 different species of bees in the state, and there's over 20,000 different types of bees and wasps and hornets in the entire world globally. These insects are very, very important, as we're learning here today in our bee webinar. They are very, very important for the stability and health of not only our native plant populations, but also our natural ecosystems and even our global food crop. So here we are at the WTMC Hoop House on WCC's campus. And what I'm standing next to here is a hive that we put in place here for the European honeybee. So a hive like this, a colony of these beehives, fun in fact, can actually have about 10 to 60,000 different bees in a colony at one time, which is really a large number of pollinators to have flying around, pollinating our flowers, not only wildflowers, but also the crops that are grown here at the Hoop House. Now, to understand how honeybees work, we have to understand how their colony is structured. And so there's basically a caste system here where there are 3 different types of bees in this colony. There are the worker bees, and these worker bees are all females, and they make up about 80 to 85% of the colony. Then there are something called drones, and drones are reproductive males. These are the males of the colony that are there for reproduction, and they do a little work, but not much. And then there is a single queen, one individual reproductive bee in this whole colony that is laying upwards of 2,000 eggs a day. Now that queen, even though we call her the queen, she is not the ruler of this hive. Point in fact, the only role that the queen has is to lay eggs. Beyond that, the hive is actually self-sustaining and self-running based on all of the worker bees, these females, being genetically hardwired. They know exactly what their jobs are. They're not told to do what, by the queen. It is simply they know from the minute they're born what to do. Workers drive the colony. One amazing fun fact about honeybees is how they navigate from the hive, go out, find food, come back, and actually tell other workers in the hive where that food is. Researchers have been able to figure out years ago that honeybees go through something called the waggle dance, kind of this figure-8 dance that they do where a honeybee, a worker bee, will leave the colony in the morning, fly around all over the place until it finds a really good source of nectar or pollen from a wildflower stand. Then we see that bee come in a straight line right back to the hive. It goes inside and it starts doing this very strange figure-8 waggle dance. What researchers have been able to figure out is that actually the timing that they do the figure-8, how long they dance for, is actually information to the other bees about how far off the food is. So how long you dance is directly correlated to how far away the food is. And if that wasn't cool enough, we also find that in the middle of the figure-8, that middle part of the 8, you'll see the bee do this extra really fast vibration, that little waggle. And that waggle, the angle that they do the waggle directly correlates to the sun and the compass point, which tells the other bees which direction to go. So by the waggle dance, not only are they tasting the pollen or the nectar on that bee that's doing the dancing, they get information about what food they're looking for, but they also are told how far to go and in which direction, so they're not flying around aimlessly. The bee that's doing the dancing stays inside, and other bees are already coming out and going right to that food source. An amazing form of communication in dancing bees. Knowing how important honeybees are and bee pollinators are in general to ecological systems, to wildflower populations, and our global food crop, scientists for the last several years now have become more and more concerned about the health of our bee populations. We now recognize that 40% of our honeybee population has decreased in the last decade or so due to a variety of reasons. Remember the importance of these animals in ecological systems and our agricultural food production. So this is of a big concern when we see a 40% decrease. We now recognize several factors are contributing to the decrease in bee populations, not just things like habitat loss and climate change, which are of concern, but even very direct concerns and issues like, for example, the use of pesticides and insecticides in the agricultural sectors. The use of chemicals called neonicotinoids are having drastic and very, very negative effects on bee populations, and even the accidental introduction of a mite. The varroa mite here has now caused massive decreases in colony collapse disease, as it's called, in bee populations, and sometimes losing 10 million hives across the United States. large numbers of bees being lost to these introduced mites, to the use of pesticides, and to climate change and habitat loss. Now that we understand and know the importance of bee populations and natural systems and our food crop, it's important for us to take the appropriate actions and put the legislation in place to protect our honeybees. So the next time you're out on campus, the next time you're walking near a beehive, be cautious, be safe, don't get too close, but come out here and check out the European honeybee.
All right, thank you, Dave. Dave, did you want it? That was outstanding. I watched it when I received it. Was there anything you wanted to add at this time or hold off till Q&A at the end?
I can hold off till Q&A. It's just remember, a large part of this topic today is about conservation, right? The importance of conserving wildflowers, pollinators, bees, ecosystems. And one of the fundamental concepts you have to do good conservation is you have to know the biology of the animal or the organism or the plant you're trying to preserve. You have to know how wildflower meadows work if you're going to save wildflower meadows. And therefore, while we get up, and we have to dig down sometimes into the details to get into the biology of things like you saw there. I wanted to hold up for you here. I have a first edition copy of von Frisch's 1953. This was the Dancing Bees. This was a first edition copy of von Frisch's work that described the waggle dance for the first time and made us realize how smart bees actually are. So I'll take some Q&A at the end, Sandy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so next up we have Kimberly Hill Edwards. And when we think of bees, most only think of the bumblebees and the honeybees. And what are some of the other different native bee species? And what can we do to help our bee population? So Kimberly, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Yep, we see it. Perfect. We got it.
Fabulous. Okay. All right. I think we should be all set. I'm so excited to be here. Get it, bee. And I'd also like to suggest maybe we do a bee dance. I really did want to see that in David's presentation. I wanted to see the bee dance, I'll be honest. So maybe we have a little, kind of like when we were in high school, we'll have a bee dance next. I came to my interest in bees maybe a little bit differently. I started native gardens at my house about 2.5 years ago because I had grass and I was sick of mowing it. That was entirely my interest, was to put plants in that were low maintenance so I didn't have to mow. It was purely selfish. And so everything that I've learned from bees has been just from watching what's been going on in my own yard and then learning through this group as well. So when I started, these were the two bees that I knew about. I knew they were honeybees and I knew they were bumblebees. And I was like, yellow and black, that's a bee. And that was really the sum total of what I knew. But as you already heard a couple of times, there are many, many other bees in Michigan. And the pictures that are at the bottom, they're not all my pictures, but they are pictures of bees that I have since observed because of putting native plants in. And you can look at the coloration. Some of them are almost totally black. There are green and blue and all kinds of different colors. So that was the first thing I had to do, was get rid of my preconceived notion about yellow and black. But the key, as Emily mentioned, is really looking for the pollen sac. And that's probably the most exciting part of seeing all these bees, is seeing their little bodies covered with pollen. The other really cool thing that I learned is that different bee species are prevalent at different times of the year. So the bee on the left, the miner bee, that's the first bee I usually see in my garden each spring. There's usually almost nothing blooming, and it'll be digging small holes in exposed dirt. And when they're flying around, they're very small. They basically just look black. So when you're seeing small flying things, especially early in the season, it's probably miner bees. You might also notice the dwarf carpenter bee. Big size carpenter bees look a lot like bumblebees, so I didn't put another picture of that, and they love to burrow into fences and exposed wood on houses and play structures. But this little dwarf carpenter bee, he really likes the ground as well. And you can see they're very small, but they show up a little later in summer. Come midsummer and late summer, that's when we see mostly the honeybees and the bumblebees. But if you look really early in the year, you'll get to find all kinds of other bees that you might even mistake as wasps or flies because they're so small. So here's a few things as I began to get more interested in not just having my plants, but in helping to support the bees. One of the things that I did was really pay attention to when my native plants were blooming. So I made sure I had some that bloomed really early. Things like wild strawberries are really great. You get to eat the strawberries afterwards too, but they're one of the very first to bloom in the season while most everything else is still dead. And then you're looking to have different species all year round. So like right now, showy goldenrod and some others like that are just finishing their blooming. You get different bee species then all summer long, and you keep giving them food to eat. Emily also mentioned the water source. I wanted to show you what I've done for a water source because my yard isn't built to have an actual water feature or a pond in it, at least yet. So these are the two versions that I've done. The top one is actually literally just a bowl that I never used. So I took and I put just a bowl and I filled it with water, but bees really have to not fall in. They need something to support them so they don't drown. And it's really easy for a water source to be too vertical on the sides and the bees try to climb in and they can't get back out. So one of the recommendations is to put either just rocks or in this case, I had old marbles my kids didn't play with anymore. So you fill the bottom and that way the bees can climb up and over those and still get down to the water. So this is something it doesn't take any amount of effort really to do. And the other one that I did was an old clay planter bottom that I didn't have on pots anymore. And I have a couple of those as well. It supports birds and some other things, which I'll show you on the next slide. And the last thing I did was to get over the idea of doing fall cleanup. There are signs everywhere right now about clean up, get all your leaves, cut down your dead plants for winter. And the best thing you can do for bees as well as other species is to leave stuff. Leave the seeds. Leave the leaves on the ground and the vegetation to hide and burrow under, especially leave dead stems. Recommendations are then in really early spring, like February, cut those lengths off to between about 8 and 20 inches at varying lengths. That's what Emily was mimicking with her bee houses. So you want to cut them, but leave them. Actually never cut the rest of it down so that bees can go in and go into those stems come springtime. We don't know which size each bee is going to want. They don't leave us a reservation. So by leaving it, we make habitat available to them. It's actually less work for you as well in the end, which is also a clear win in my opinion. And the last thing that I will mention is, there we go. Oh, I went too far. Sorry about that. When you start to do things with the idea of supporting bees, you actually unintentionally support a whole lot of other species. And so these are all pictures from my garden of friends that I have made, I'll put it that way, that weren't part of my initial plan. So you might notice there's that same clay pot bottom, but there's an American toad in it. And so especially in the hottest part of the year, so the end of July all the way through August, the toads will come and they'll just sit for like an hour in my little bee baths and they'll soak the water up and then off they'll go. But it's been a really fun thing to watch and to watch them grow from being little tiny guys all the way up to big whopping toads. And then we can name them, of course. I've also seen, this summer was the first time I had milkweed tussock moth caterpillars. They are crazy in the caterpillar world that they go through 3 or 4 molts and they look totally different every single time. I was really looking to support bees with the flowers of the milkweed, But in the end, I supported caterpillars as well. And then I've got a couple of others that showed up. I had this black swallowtail caterpillar in my native garden, and these red banded leafhoppers, which are just the most vibrant color I think I've ever seen. So all of these are native Michigan species. They all have a role in the food chain that's going on outside. And so by focusing on bees, I've created a great habitat where lots of other insects and toads and birds want to come in. So when we do things to make the environment better, we help a lot of other things. So thank you for sharing my journey through my love and interest in bees.
Thank you, Kimberly. So next we're going to have it maybe unshare your screen. Yep, perfect. And next we've got Monica Mila, who's going to be talking to us about how rain gardens and how planting native plants can support our bees.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica. I teach in WCC's Community Enrichment Program, and I've also been a master gardener for about 15 years. And I will talk about gardening for bees. A lot of these are going to be a little bit of repetition from what we've heard from the other speakers. So I'll talk about how to attract bees, a little bit about rain gardens, which is a very nice way to plant natives and attract bees. And then I will highlight 4 specific flowers that are beneficial to bees or attract bees and talk a little bit about them. So as everyone else has already talked about, don't cut down the plant stems in the fall. The bees will actually put the eggs in there and they will overwinter in there. So even come springtime, I would say cut them back to 15 inches because that way the bees can get out. And frankly, if you have tall plants, the new growth will grow around the old stems and you don't really need as many plant supports. I'm an organic gardener, but even if I weren't, I don't use pesticides or herbicides. I don't even use friendly ones because anything that kills bad bugs can also kill good bugs. We've really covered the providing water, and the shallow dish is really important because as Kimberly was saying, otherwise bees will drown in the water, and that happened before I realized and I was super sad, but the marbles really help. And I believe Emily was talking about how a lot of our native bees live in the ground. And so if you have a place that has patchy grass, or you just can leave bare soil, that will help them dig in the ground. You don't want to mulch it. And if you have a south facing slope or a sunny area, that's the best area to leave bare. You can also make a bee hotel, which Emily covered. Other things to consider are bees see in ultraviolet, so they don't see red colors. So blue, purple, orange, yellow, and white flowers are the best for attracting bees. Choose flat or single blossoms. In the picture at the top, the darker orange is an example of a single flower and the lighter orange is a double flower. And as you can see in the single flower, more of the anthers where the pollen is are exposed in the single flowers. So that's going to be a lot easier for bees to get what they need. Bees also like fragrant flowers, and so do people. So if you can find some of those to mix in with your native plants, mostly native plants aren't fragrant, but I like to throw in a couple just because I like them too. And then as Kimberly said, having blooms all season from early spring to late fall is really beneficial for 2 reasons. The social bees, like the honeybees, will need the pollen and nectar all season to feed their colonies. And solitary bees, like a lot of our native bees, are active during different parts of the season. And the graph kind of shows which ones are active when. This also, we talk a lot about flowers, but trees are also great pollinating sources. Trees do have little flowers early on, and shrubs as well. Rain gardens are kind of an ideal place for native plants and therefore for bees. And I had to add the little bee to this picture because they only showed butterflies, but that also goes along with what Kimberly was saying about once you do one thing that's environmentally friendly, it often has a chain reaction of many different species. So a rain garden is kind of a depressed shape in the landscape that collects rainwater from roofs, driveway, or the street. Usually in rain events, the water doesn't just trickle into the soil. It goes pretty fast in runoff, and like over lawns and other impervious surfaces, it just runs into the sewer. Well, a rain garden really, and the soil is amended so the water can sink in better. So it slows the runoff, cools the runoff, and cleans the runoff, and supports plants that you grow there. It's planted with native plants, which that just means plants that grew here before the European settlers came. And the reason for that is, I show this slide in any topic I teach. And the wonderful thing about native plants is if you look at the biomass above the soil versus the root structure below the soil of mature plants, you can see how crazy huge the roots are. And this allows them to withstand both periods of drought and to be in standing water for some time. Plant roots, like us, need to breathe. They need air, and they extend so deep down that if the top couple of inches are flooded, they don't care. And if it's been dry a really long time, they extend far enough down to reach more into the groundwater. And despite the word rain garden, and they can be used in areas that are damp, but generally they're only watered by rain, so the plants have to be able to withstand drought as well. So native plants are great. Now I'm going to talk about 4 specific plants that I have in my own rain garden, and you can grow in native plant bed or you can integrate into your non-native landscape. All of the plants I'm going to show are perennials, which mean they can survive over winter and in our climate and come back year after year. And when I talk about what kind of shade preferences they want, full sun means at least 6 or more hours of sun. Part sun is 3 to 6 hours, and shade is 3 or fewer hours. So this is Golden Alexander, or Zizia aurea. The reason why Latin names are important isn't just so you can be super cool at parties and pronounce it right and have no one to correct you, but because common names, people often call plants different things, or the same plant different things, but with their Latin name, you know exactly what it is. So this Zizia will grow in full to part shade. Depending on the year, it can get 1 foot to 3 feet tall. It blooms in late spring to early summer, so it's one of the earlier bloomers. And if you cut it back, you might get a second bloom. It is native to Michigan. It will grow in all soil types, including clay. And it attracts sweat bees, mason bees, miner bees, and carpenter bees. It also attracts, and I can't say this one because it's not a flower, Andrena ziziae, a minor bee specialist, and it is also a food source for the swallowtail butterfly that I believe Kimberly had a photo of. Secondly, this is one of my favorite plants, wild geranium, or Geranium maculatum. The annual geraniums are not botanically geraniums, they're pelargoniums. We won't worry about that right now. Wild geranium is another fairly early bloomer from late spring to early summer. It's also sometimes called cranesbill, and it is native to Michigan. It does great in full sun to part shade, and depending on maturity and seasons, it can get 1 to 3 feet tall. It's kind of mounding, and even when the little purple flowers aren't in bloom, I like the mounding shape. It's kind of a nice ground cover. It also does well in all soil types, and it attracts bumblebees, mason bees, miner bees, and cuckoo bees. Bee balm. There's two different kinds of bee balm native to Michigan, Monarda fistulosa and Monarda didyma. The didyma is the the scarlet or red ones, and the fistulosa is the pale purple ones. Monardas and other colors are nativars, which means they've been cultivated and aren't technically native anymore. But this one is also called wild bergamot and a couple other things. It is kind of a mid-season bloomer from July to early August. Also can handle full sun or part shade, and gets about 3 to 4 feet tall and handles all soil types. It attracts bumblebees, sweat bees, and leaf cutter bees. And I kind of paired both of these, boneset and Joe Pye weed. Both are eupatorium. Boneset is parafoliatum, and the other one is maculatum. The Joe Pye is the purple one, and the boneset is the white one. I think they really look nice together. They also like the same conditions, which tends to be moderate to wet soil. However, I have them in super dry clay, and they do well there too. They just don't get as tall. In my garden, they get about 6 feet. In wetter conditions, I've seen them 8 to 10 feet tall. They do well in full sun to part shade. They are native to Michigan. They're later in the season from late August to September. And they're attractive to bumblebees, sweat bees, miner bees, cellophane bees, and masked bees. And that is my presentation.
Thank you, Monica. So last but not least, we've got Holly from our WCC Landscape and Grounds, who's going to talk more about our campus landscape and our bee-friendly practices. Okay, perfect. Yep, we see it.
There we go. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm Holly Herman. I'm the Landscape and Grounds Manager here on campus. I'm fairly new to the bee initiatives, and thanks to the other members on the panel, we're starting to incorporate more of those programs on campus. So today I'm just going to share some things about our department, the Michigan mission background, and some of our current practices and goals and future projects. So our department really strives just to provide a safe, attractive, and enjoyable overall environment for the students and guests and everyone who comes to Washtenaw Community College. And then in addition to that, to meeting the needs of the college, we explore ways to reduce our impact on the environment and demonstrate more sustainable practices. So just some quick background facts. Campus is about 295 total acres, and our department maintains actively about 146 of those acres. We have approximately 2.6 acres in planting bed areas, and around 9,000 annual flowers are planted every spring. So some of the bee-friendly practices, I don't know that anyone has mentioned specifically the natural areas and their locations. This is kind of a diagram that shows some of those locations on campus, and they're around our pond areas, bioswales, and transition areas. And they're used typically for classroom and instruction, recreation and exercise, folks using the nature trails for walking, and then of course for wildlife habitat. So the primary practice that we have on campus is our integrated pest management plan, which is known as an IPM. And it just provides specific guidelines and combines different techniques to really minimize pest damage. And you're looking at things like environmental risks, public health and safety, and overall aesthetics in the landscape. And we're not trying to eliminate pests, but really to just find a balance. In a setting as ours, really sometimes pests have to be eliminated or handled or maintained to an acceptable level. And we use a 4-tiered IPM plan, which really to minimize pest problems related to public health or environmental risks and to get them on an acceptable level. So the first part of the 4-tiered approach really is to monitor and identify, do I have the correct pest? Is the pest a problem, or is it really a beneficial insect? Sometimes you'll see on a plant damage and you'll think it's the pest that you see, but really that's the beneficial pest, and the problem pest or thing causing the issue has disappeared or is long gone or is no longer an issue. And so that's the second part, is it a temporary issue or is it something that's ongoing? And then the second part of that is to set your action threshold. At what point is the pest issue beyond acceptance and you have to take action? And that's based on, like I said, a public health threat, in certain businesses, monetary losses, or aesthetic damage in case of such things like nursery inventories. The next step in it is really you're looking at the cultural requirements, things that you're going to do to minimize, to increase the plant health and minimize any corrective action. And that's things like soil prep, plant selection, picking the right plant in the right place to begin with, proper spacing, proper watering schedule, and in our case, mulching. It reduces pesticide applications for herbicides, but I've learned today that that's not the best thing for bees that nest in the ground. So, and then good sanitation practices to avoid spreading diseases. And then the final aspect of that is really control and evaluation. You can look at different types of controls, mechanical, biological, chemical, and then the evaluation of your treatment. Did it work? And then monitoring your results moving forward. So recommendations if you are utilizing chemical controls, and in some cases that's required. Some industries require it. As some of the other folks had mentioned, you're going to want to avoid applying products containing the neonicotinoids. So those are a family of insecticides, and they're really considered highly toxic to bees. And then you're going to want to select organic or pollinator-friendly pesticides when you do have to utilize a pesticide, and read the labels and apply as directed, because the label is the law. Here at Washtenaw, we limit the overall use of insecticides on campus. We have one application, and it is the pollinator-friendly reduced risk pesticide, and that's Acelepryn for grub control on our turf. But the active ingredient, the same one, is available in the homeowner product GrubX if it's required for aesthetics. Other practices, as folks have mentioned, pesticide-free zones. Here we have several areas on campus where no pesticides are used at all. The core garden, the food forest. We have a couple of green roofs on campus. And then another good practice is allow weeds to share space in your turf grass. Clover and dandelions really provide good resources for bees. And everyone agrees that we want to select native plants whenever possible. So native plants, they haven't been genetically altered for appearance. So that means that, and I think Monica may have mentioned that double flowering plants or plants that are genetically engineered for bigger blooms can sometimes physically prevent pollinators from reaching the pollen and the nectar. Or they're sterile and they don't provide good resources either. And then choose plants, of course, that flower different times of the year so that you have season-long resources. Some of our goals for the future. Obviously, we're going to continue to do our renewal as a Bee Campus USA. And then we'd like to include some dedicated pollinator gardens on campus. We've talked about that. We need to select some locations. And Emily, I forgot to mention also that we'd like to have some bee houses installed. So we're working on that project. Hopefully we can move forward with that. And then increase signage and awareness of our pollinator initiatives just across the board. And then this is my contact information if anyone has any additional questions or would like to get more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. And thanks you everyone for all our presenters. We're clapping. So we're going to open up for Q&A. We still have like a good 11 minutes here, but let me I'm going to scroll back up the chat box real quick. And early on, Mia was asking, since bees need flowers, nectar year long, how do they survive the winter? And I had thought they hibernate, but I guess that isn't right. Who could answer our question here for Mia?
They don't. They put the eggs, which, well, maybe Dave can answer it better, but it's my understanding that the bees die at the end of the season and they put the eggs or larvae or whatever in like the ground or the stems, and those emerge next year if they make it over winter.
Yeah, and really, there's with 450 species, we'll keep it to Michigan bees. If we go global, it gets more interesting in the tropics, but then again, winter's not so much of a deal there. But with the 450 species in Michigan, you're right. There's a variety of ways that bees overwinter. Some go and basically have the colony die off, and they basically have the next generation in stasis, waiting for the eggs to hatch. Some bees actually can use sugars as an antifreeze, and they will overwinter, like bald-faced hornets and so forth. Some of these can actually go into old hives or holes in stumps and so forth, and they can overwinter and in essence hibernate like some insects do. And what's really amazing, since this is we're on honeybees predominantly, the honeybee amazingly in hives, they go in, and since they've made all that honey, right, what that honey is for, they commonly feed their young pollen. So that honey is used as a reserve to basically keep them alive over the winter, and most importantly, keep the queen alive. We know that honeybee workers eat the honey, go around the female, and vibrate their body so much that they maintain the queen at 90 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the winter, which is phenomenal when it's -10 outside in January, that queen bee is sitting in there at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So what's the answer? All types of different ways.
Wow. All right, thanks, Dave. So I see another question here by Gwen. It says, last winter, my bee house was predated by birds, and I suspect, attacked by, okay. This year I put in the detached garage to protect from birds. When should I put it back outside? Should I clean out the dried mud when? Bee house. So
I could start to answer that, and maybe someone else like Kimberly has more to add. I have seen pictures of these bee hotels with chicken wire over them, so the birds can't get to the little bees in the tubes. So putting chicken wire up could help with that. If you are protecting the bees as they overwinter in your garage, you would bring them out in the spring. And it depends where the mud is, because in some of the bees, the mud or leaves are often used to plug up the holes and to separate each brood cell one from another along the stem. So if that's the mud you're talking about at the end of the stem, no, don't remove that. That's protecting the bees. If the mud is on the outside of the house, that would be okay to clean it up.
Yeah, but once the bees emerge from there as adults, you throw out the straws and start back over, because if you leave that is going to get a lot of disease and fungus and stuff in there. So that was just a point. Like originally a couple of years ago, when people first started selling or making the bee houses, it was just like the drilled holes in the stem, and there isn't really a great way to clean those. So I really like the idea of putting the straws either by themselves or like you had in the bamboo, because then you can throw those out, put in new ones, and it's always clean and fresh.
So Umar had a question too. Are fungicides safe for bees? So the answer is no, they are not. So that kind of answered there. Let me keep going. Somebody wanted to know, good, we have lots of books in the library. Unfortunately, the library is closed at the moment for all kinds of creating a bee-friendly garden. But I know Emily shared a good website from the Society of Bees that you can look into. Let me see what else, who else has a question in the chat box, and we can open up even more. For
Yes.
Emily, Daniel is asking for Emily, did the introduction of European bees introduce any negative consequences?
Well, anytime you introduce a non-native species, they outcompete. I mean, they can compete with other native species. I was reading, it's pretty interesting that native bees can hold their own against honeybees. So we think the honeybees are the great pollinators, but native bees spend more time outside because they're better acclimated to our climate when they do studies of them. And then furthermore, native bees, if they're present with the European honeybees, get the honeybees to do more work because they make them visit more flowers because they're present on the flowers. So then the honeybees will skip over a flower with a bee on it. I don't actually know about negative consequences, but I do know that our native bees are a lot more important than we think they are.
All right, thanks. And Dave, it says that follow-up question that's by Daniel as well is, where is the WCC hive located? And have you tried the honey? If so, was it a dominant taste of a flower profile?
So the beehive that we have is located on the backside of the WTMC hoop house. Used to be the core garden. It's the hoop house now, and it's fenced off and gated off, but oftentimes that gate is open for people to come in and help and volunteer. You can see it in the parking lot as you drive around the backside. You'll see it sitting there amongst some pine trees, but it's in the back of the hoop house fenced off area. I have not tried the honey from the hoop house, so no, I do not know. And I did want to have a little follow up to that last question, and Emily makes a really good point here. And one thing that we got to remember is that this is the European honeybee we introduced, so it is a non-native, but non-native is not the same thing as invasive. And so we have a lot of species that are non-native. They were brought here by Europeans or others, but they've not caused an imbalance in our ecosystems. They're just non-natives. Invasive species are non-natives and oftentimes monopolize or overtake natural systems. And so the European honeybee, very luckily, is non-native, but it's not invasive, and it tends to be a generalist. So it's really happy with a lot of different flower species out there where our native bees have evolved oftentimes very specifically to co-evolve with certain flowers. And so there's enough separation there that they're non-native, but they're not invasive. It was a great question.
Thank you. And Smita is sharing a recommended book here, Beekeeper's Lament by Hannah Norhaus. So that's in the chat box too. So Nana says, one of my neighbors started a beehive and realized that her honey batch was infected and her bees were sick. She told me she was going to conduct a test using powdered milk to figure out what went wrong with her bees. By any chance, do you know what type of tests is she conducting? She's using powdered milk.
Yeah, there's I think she might be testing for that varroa mite, and I'm only saying this half educated here. I think one of the ways you can check and see how badly your colony is infected with that mite, which feeds off the fat reserves and such of your younger bees particularly, is to go in and something with a sugar roll, or you roll the bees in powdered sugar and then you shake them off and the mites fall through. And there's some type of test with sugar, if my memory serves, that is a check for how infected your colony is with that varroa mite, which is one of the leading causes of colony collapse disorder. So that's my semi-educated guess.
And we have another recommendation by Rebecca, Honeybee Democracy. Okay, Smita, but murder hornet nets, huge threat and potentially invasive, right, Dave? Okay, so Nana has a follow-up question. What are your thoughts about the Japanese killer wasp entering America? Anybody?
I don't know that species exactly, but one of the classic examples is the Africanized honeybee, right? The Africanized killer bees, which I think is an inappropriate name. Yes, they can kill, but so can cars. We don't call them killer vehicles. And so the point here again is that question of, we have these introduced species. Yes, murder hornets, they're very large and scary. Yes, Africanized honeybees can be very, very aggressive. But the real question is, are they non-natives or are they invasives? right? And there's a difference there. There's a concern to human safety as compared to ecosystem stability, right? I don't know that exact species. We have to try to balance those two things out there. Once we know that and we have those, keep in mind, this is one of the concerns with climate change, is that one of the driving forces that has kept Africanized honeybees, for example, in the South and Southwest, is it's too cold up here in the North. Well, as we have global temperatures rise, even by a couple degrees, we clearly see plant zones changing and going farther north, and we see the ranges of these invasive species going further and further north as well. So that's a big concern to watch for as temperatures go up, is the ranges of these species that are introduced and if they're invasive or not.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions from anyone? If you wanted to unmute and ask a question, we're at 5 o'clock.
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
The person who was saying that they were checking for a disease with the powdered milk, Dave had it right. It was a powdered sugar and they're checking for mites, but that actually would not affect their honey. It would affect their bees' health, but the honey would be okay. And that's not actually a very good way to check. People like to do an alcohol wash as well. But some people don't even check for that. They kind of let their bees do their own thing. And if they don't make it, then they're not very good at fighting mites. It's a more of a natural approach. But it shouldn't have actually affect the person's honey. It's just affecting their bees. Their bees would be sick, but their honey would not be tainted by the mites.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Sure.
Any other questions from anyone? All right, then I will wrap up. Thank you for all our panelists coming in today and our crowd who is out here. This session is recorded, and I'm gonna put it, I actually put the link to our Bee Campus USA guide where our site is kind of like where we hold everything. And I will upload it, well, I'll have to upload it to probably YouTube and then connect it there. It'll be there by the weekend. And Dave, do I have permission to put your separate 6-minute Beehive Campus video clip on that site as well?
You certainly do.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there an attendance list for part-timers or anything?
Oh, sure.
Sandy, we can get the attendance list from Zoom.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure to download it too. Yep. And I was hoping I made, but I noticed all the people have their names. I had forgotten to mention in case their name was an initial to change it to a name. But from what I can tell, everyone's got it as their name that's identifiable. Yep, I will send that out too. Well, thanks. We had a number, I saw 57 as a high.
Yeah. Wow.
Outstanding, everybody. Thanks for collaborating on this too. So.
Nice job, Sandy. Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was
Fantastic.
happy they came. Our Bee Friendly Day arrived and it was good. And so it's a good talk. And I think, the virtual environment just, I think, brings in more. So maybe in the winter, sometime in the winter we do, but actually it made me think, couldn't we do a virtual like bee house? Like people get supplies ahead of time and you virtually build your beehive? I don't know if it's too much of a challenge. So just a thought with that. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I'll send out the list in case you need the list. I will download the participant list there too.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Good job, everybody.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Bye.